What Iran faces today is not new. It is one of the oldest problems in human history, the moment when a nation realizes that its opponent is stronger in conventional terms. More aircraft, more firepower, more global reach. And in that moment, history shows that there are only two paths. The first is to meet that power directly and risk collapse. The second is to change the rules of the fight entirely. This is where one of the most powerful ancient systems ever used comes into focus: the Fabian strategy, blended with decentralized guerrilla warfare. Not a strategy of dramatic victories, but a strategy of survival, endurance, and ultimately control over how the war unfolds. To understand how this works, you have to go back to ancient Rome. At the height of its power, Rome faced a man who seemed unstoppable: Hannibal. He defeated Roman armies again and again in open battle. Entire legions were wiped out. Panic spread. Rome was losing badly. And then came a decision that shocked everyone. A Roman general, Quintus Fabius Maximus, chose not to fight. Not because Rome was weak in spirit, but because he understood something deeper than most commanders ever do. That strength is not always measured by who wins the next battle, but by who controls the outcome of the war. Fabius refused to engage Hannibal directly. Instead, he shadowed him. He followed him. He harassed him. He cut off his access to food and resources. He burned land that Hannibal could use. He stretched the conflict across time. And for this, he was mocked, called a coward, accused of delaying victory. But what he was really doing was something far more powerful. He was denying Hannibal the kind of war he needed to win. And in doing so, he kept Rome alive. This is the exact lens through which Iran must be understood. Iran cannot afford to fight a war that looks like a traditional war. Fighter jets meeting fighter jets, fleets meeting fleets, large formations clashing in open terrain. That kind of war favors the superpower every time. Instead, the logic shifts completely. The goal is no longer to win quickly. The goal is to make victory impossible for the opponent. In practical terms, this begins with one core principle: avoid decisive confrontation. Iran's strength lies not in matching a superpower's ability to project force, but in denying that force a clear target. This means dispersing military assets, decentralizing command, and ensuring that no single strike can cripple the entire system. In ancient times, armies that concentrated their forces could be destroyed in one decisive battle. Fabius understood this and refused to give Hannibal that opportunity. In a modern setting, this translates into a defense structure where units operate independently, where infrastructure is hardened or hidden, and where the system continues to function even under sustained attack. But avoidance alone is not enough. The second layer of this ancient system is constant pressure. Not large, dramatic attacks, but small, repeated disruptions. This is where the guerrilla aspect merges with the Fabian approach. Instead of confronting the strongest parts of an enemy's force, the focus shifts to its weakest and most vulnerable systems. Its logistics, its supply chains, its extended lines of operation. In ancient campaigns, armies lived off the land and depended on long supply routes. When those were disrupted, even the strongest force could begin to weaken. Today, the same principle applies, but on a much larger scale. Iran's geography plays a critical role in this. Its terrain is not open and easily controlled. It is complex, layered, and difficult to dominate completely. Mountains, deserts, urban density, and strategic choke points all contribute to an environment where a large, advanced military cannot operate freely without significant effort. This naturally supports a Fabian-style approach, where the defender uses space and terrain to stretch the attacker, forcing them to commit more resources for diminishing returns. And then comes the most important element of all: time. Time is not neutral in war. It favors one side over the other. In a conventional conflict, the stronger side often seeks a quick, decisive victory. It relies on speed, shock, and overwhelming force to achieve its objectives before resistance can organize effectively. The Fabian strategy flips this completely. It turns time into a weapon. The longer the conflict continues, the more the balance begins to shift, not in terms of raw power, but in terms of cost, pressure, and sustainability. For a superpower, war is not just fought on the battlefield. It is fought in its economy, in its politics, and in the perception of its people. Long wars are expensive. They drain resources. They create uncertainty. They invite global scrutiny. And over time, they begin to raise a question that becomes harder and harder to answer. What is the cost of continuing, and is it worth it? This is where the Fabian system becomes most dangerous. It does not defeat the enemy's army directly. It defeats the enemy's ability to justify the war. This is where Iran's strategy can become particularly effective. By focusing on actions that are low cost but high impact, it can create an imbalance where the cost of responding is greater than the cost of initiating. A small disruption in a critical economic or logistical pathway can force a massive response. This creates a cycle where the stronger power is constantly spending more resources, more effort, more attention, just to maintain control. Over time, this imbalance grows. But this system only works if it is supported by discipline. One of the greatest challenges of the Fabian strategy, both in ancient times and today, is internal pressure. People want quick victories. Leaders want visible success. The temptation to engage in a decisive battle can be overwhelming. Fabius himself faced intense criticism from his own people. They wanted action. They wanted a clear win. And when they abandoned his strategy and chose to fight directly, the result was catastrophic. For Iran, the same challenge exists. Maintaining a long-term, indirect approach requires patience and control. It requires resisting the urge to escalate in ways that favor the opponent. It requires a clear understanding that survival is the first victory, and that shaping the conditions of the conflict is more important than winning any single engagement. Another critical layer of this system is the integration of the population into the defensive structure, not as fighters, but as a network of awareness and resilience. In ancient guerrilla systems, local populations provided information, support, and adaptability. They made it impossible for an invading force to fully control the environment. In a modern context, this translates into a society that is prepared, informed, and able to function even under pressure. At the same time, the strategy must carefully manage resources. One of the key advantages of the Fabian approach is that it reduces the need for large-scale, resource-intensive engagements. By avoiding direct confrontation and focusing on targeted disruption, it preserves both manpower and material. This is critical for a country facing a stronger opponent. Every resource saved extends the ability to endure. Every unnecessary loss shortens it. And then there is the psychological dimension. War is not just physical, it is mental. Constant uncertainty, continuous small disruptions, and the absence of clear victories can have a profound effect on morale. For the attacking force, the inability to achieve decisive results creates frustration. For the defending force, endurance builds confidence. Over time, this psychological balance becomes just as important as any physical advantage. And then there is the psychological dimension. War is not just physical, it is mental. Constant uncertainty, continuous small disruptions, and the absence of clear victories can have a profound effect on morale. For the attacking force, the inability to achieve decisive results creates frustration. For the defending force, endurance builds confidence. Over time, this psychological balance becomes just as important as any physical advantage. In the modern world, this approach can be enhanced by technology, but its core remains unchanged. Decentralization, mobility, resilience, and patience are still the foundation. The tools may evolve, but the logic does not. And for a country like Iran, facing the possibility of conflict with a superpower, this logic offers a path, not to easy victory, but to survival, leverage, and ultimately control over how the conflict unfolds. The final insight is perhaps the most important. The goal is not to defeat the superpower in the way it expects to be defeated. The goal is to make the war itself unwinnable. To create a situation where continuing becomes more costly than stopping. To shift the question from who is stronger to who can endure longer.